Right, comrades, once again, you're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. Today's topic is the United States, principally following the recent election of Donald Trump. And we're fortunate to have as our speaker John Clark, who's a Marxist writer who lives in Canada. He was an organizer of the Unemployed Workers Association in Ontario and is currently a lecturer in York University in Toronto. The topic of America is particularly important today. We were just talking about the panic that's been caused across the globe following the return of this right-wing demagogue in a major country and the influence it has right across the globe. We can see it already in Europe with Nigel Farage, the British right-wing leader, being projected now as the next prime minister in Britain. He's a colleague and a friend of Trump's. Trump will also have stimulated and raised the profile of right-wing leaders like Le Pen in France, Meloni in Italy, and others across the continent like Orban and people like him in the old countries of the East. There's a global threat from his election, and I just want to make a note of this stuff he's talking about now, the seizure of sovereign territory, which is a new development in world politics, that by force if necessary he will seize, or says he will, sovereign territory from Denmark and Canada, Mexico, and Panama. That's a new threat. And sometimes people take Trump as a bit of a joke. There's no joke here. That threat from him will stimulate interest amongst the right wing in America. We should note with regard to Greenland that the people in Greenland have been fighting for independence from Denmark. And it's very unlikely they'll accede to giving away their country to Trump. Trump just decides that because it's useful territory for him and the United States, because it's midway between Russia and the United States and accessible to China, that he can just seize it. And also the huge mineral wealth which exists in Greenland as yet unexplored. And he kept alive the threat that he would take that by force if necessary. Likewise, in Panama, the Panama Canal was sold to from the United States to America 25 years ago, and now Trump decides he can take it back again because it's in his interests. In relation to Canada, it's not an immediately serious threat that he would seize Canada, but we should just remind Trump that in the War of 1812, America lost. In fact, the British troops went into the United States from Canada in 1812, seized the White House, set fire to it, although it wasn't called the White House then. When they repainted it, they painted it white. So it's now the White House. But that's a lesson for Trump to bear in mind. And then with regard to Mexico, there was a time when Mexico controlled California, Utah, uh, most of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Wyoming, several countries. And then there was the Treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe, where America made an agreement with Mexico. They paid over a lot of money. I think it was something like $15 million at the time from the United States to Mexico for these territories. And now he's talking about American interests becoming dominant again in Mexico, and even talking again about land seizures and so on. And then the silly notion of converting the name, the Gulf of Mexico, to the Gulf of America. Using that logic, every single water course around America would all be called American this and American that. There'd be no such thing as the Irish Sea with the British Sea. I mean, it's just rubbish. It's a nonsense approach. But unfortunately for Trump, this gets an echo. John can explain this across the states. And just one final point, I'm sure John will deal with all this. His release of 1,600 people who were in prison as one of his first acts as president. We should note that two of those people, the leaders of the Oath Keepers and of the Proud Boys, are quasi-fascist organizations. In the case of the leaders, actual fascist leaders. And one of them had a 20-year sentence, and another had an 18-year sentence, now commuted by Trump. So we're facing a big danger. And for many people, Trump is a joke, but there's no joke going on in this case. He's using this to build up a right-wing base right across the world. It's not simply confined to the United States. And then he has this clown act with Elon Musk dancing around on the platform and giving Nazi salutes, but at the same time as being acting a clown, He's also a major supporter of the fascists in Germany, of Farage in Britain, and other right-wing leaders. So all of this, I'm sure John can deal with it all. These are some preliminary points I wanted to throw in for discussion. So, John, how long do you think you might need to speak?
Well, I was told 20 to 25 minutes, so I think I'll try and stay within that.
Yeah, that's fine, John. So after 20 minutes, I'll give you some kind of a reminder. So don't be offended. It's just a...
Feel free to give me the hook.
You can keep going. So after about 20 minutes, I'll give you a little reminder to tell you where you are. Okay, John, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, comrades. So I'm based in Canada, so I'm not speaking from the standpoint of someone who's directly involved in struggles in the US. Although, as was suggested, Canada has a bit of a ringside seat when it comes to the situation. I want to try and offer a bit of an assessment of what the second Trump presidency represents, and looking for a way to sort of begin to grapple with things. I was drawn to the famous comment that Antonio Gramsci made with regards to a period of volatility and crisis producing morbid symptoms, and it seems to me that Trump fully qualifies when it comes to being a morbid symptom. Clearly, he represents a brutal and reactionary agenda. But if he's a symptom, I think it's necessary to look at what's at what he's a symptom of. And so I'm going to suggest that Trump and his America First approach are very much a product of global crisis and of a relative decline in American dominance, in American hegemony. And I'm going to try and look at some of those things. It seems to me that it's necessary to begin by sort of assessing the position of the United States in the world, which really was consolidated at the end of the Second World War. So you had a period in which, for decades, the United States held a position of really unrivaled dominance throughout the world. The Soviet Union was a rival, but I think a lesser rival. And the United States organized a whole global network. Unlike the earlier hegemonic powers, for the most part, it didn't directly occupy. It chose to use forms of economic domination in order to create what was effectively an indirect global empire. Certainly, the US had an enormous capacity for military violence and still does, and has not been shy about putting that into effect at all. And it's not been shy about interfering in the affairs of other countries through military coups and such like. But the United States also brokered, with all its limitations and failings and hypocrisies, a multilateral framework within the world. And that involved some element of give and take, some element of compromise, that worked very well over an extended period of time. Lesser powers and junior partners were given their place, and concessions were brokered. In the last number of years, of course, the US position has been challenged by a series of rivals, most notably China, which is now presented as the new workshop of the world. And we have, of course, Russia and a series of regional of powers that are asserting their interests on a regional basis. I think of Iran especially. And so this has led to a situation where that period of undisputed domination has really given way to an emerging multipolar reality. And I think this has sent shockwaves through US society. Certainly, mood of reactionary rage is not unique to the United States. There are rightward developing directions in a whole series of countries, including here in Canada. But that mood of reactionary rage really led to something of a transformation in terms of the Republican Party, and Trump, with his MAGA base, was really a manifestation of that. The America First approach that has been advanced by Trump is a break with the whole multilateral framework. Trump has very little patience for the United Nations, very little patience for international agreements, very little patience for the feelings or concerns of other powers. Everything is to be based on immediate US self-interest, and notions of responsible global stewardship go out of the way, and an entirely transactional approach is going to be taken. This, of course, was true of the first Trump presidency, but there were some, I think, restraining factors at work there. There was, of course, the global pandemic, which threw a bit of a spanner into the works, but as well, there was at that time significant opposition within the U.S. establishment to the America First direction, and when Trump was defeated, I think it would be true to say that the bulk of the U.S. establishment was at that stage backing the Democrats as the new A team, so to speak. That ran into enormous difficulties in the form of the Biden presidency, which I think was quite disastrous. When Biden took power, and squeaked in, there was very much talk of a restoration. Biden himself talked in terms of restoring respected and trusted U.S. world leadership, largely fictional, but not by no means an irrelevant consideration. And the Biden presidency proved to be a great failure. He did not succeed in sustaining a level of domestic support. US prestige internationally was largely undermined, and the whole support for the Gaza genocide proved to be a complete disaster. So that means, I think, that Trump returns triumphantly this time. He returns with a greatly, in a way that's much stronger, with much less opposition within the establishment to confront him and confound him. And so his inauguration seemed to sort of set the stamp on things in many, many ways. I read one report. I confess, bring myself to actually watch the inauguration presentation, but in one of the reports I read, he actually talked in terms of, he suggested that the assassination attempt that he'd survived in the summer. He'd survived because God had spared him so that he could make America great again, which, I mean, is absolutely incredible for an elected president to sort of begin with that kind of right religious message. It's quite astounding. And he made, in his initial day, he signed 26 executive orders that are a veritable barrage of reactionary measures that are far from surprising, but quite brutal. The infamous Elon Musk will have responsibility for gutting the public service and gutting systems of social provision. He took care to again withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord and declared an energy emergency and repeated the horrible Republican slogan, "Drill, baby, drill." So there is going to be an unbridled attack on the environment, a complete disregard for issues of climate change and such like. And his he covered a whole swathe of reactionary measures, promoting business interests, attacking workers' rights, uh, everything that represented social backwardness and reaction was put forward. And he made various commitments to set the stage for an enormous attack on immigrants and refugees within the United States that I think will be absolutely incredible in terms of its scale and in terms of its reactionary content. I noticed that off the bat, he removed protection against raids in schools and hospitals and such places. So clearly something dreadful is going to be unleashed. Internationally, we may expect a whole series of dreadful measures, not least of which will be in the Middle East and in Palestine. I see that he immediately withdrew the sanctions that had been imposed on the most reactionary and fanatical settlers in the West Bank, and he, of course, made all kinds of bellicose talk of seizing the Panama Canal and Greenland and what have you. He's placed a freeze on foreign aid. He's withdrawn from a whole series of international bodies. And with regards to his international dealings, some of the things he said about Canada were really quite revealing. I note that he appeared virtually at the World Economic Forum in Davos, somewhere where he's really out of place because he doesn't really do compassionate capitalism. But he suggested there that that he was going to completely reorganize to U.S. advantage the trading relationship that exists along a massive border with Canada, and he was quite upfront about it. He suggested that the United States doesn't need Canadian lumber, it doesn't need oil and gas, it doesn't need Canada to be manufacturing cars. That an entirely changed arrangement, utterly to the advantage of the United States, is going to be imposed. And he said, I mean, it's correct to say that there's no immediate prospect of Canada being annexed, but he did say that again that Canada had the option of becoming the 51st state, which is I'm far from a nationalist, but it obviously is an outrageous expression of contempt that most U.S. presidents would have avoided saying anything like that publicly. But he's prepared to do that. He has no interest whatever in stable, respectful dealings with other countries, and that's manifested in this whole approach that he's taking. So I think that we can say that we see Trump coming to power at a time when globally there is a great deal of volatility, a great deal of uncertainty. And his second presidency represents something that is enormously dangerous. The Democrats have really not succeeded in putting together a viable opposition. That's part of a general collapse internationally of the political center at this particular time. But his presidency, I think, will be more assertive, more confident, more reactionary, and more dangerous than his first one. It has incredible implications within the United States, but on the world stage, it represents something really a major change. And the attempt through the Biden period to create a viable, stable, functioning alternative to his America First approach is in tatters at this particular time. Obviously, I think that points to the final conclusion, the absolutely necessary conclusion, that while there will be legal challenges and while there will be critical voices raised, stopping Trump is not something that can be trusted to the liberal wing of the establishment within the United States or across the world. There is going to be enormous attacks launched by this regime, domestically, one of class war, and a brutal agenda internationally. That means that working class mobilization and working class resistance within the United States and global resistance is the absolutely.
Your side of this, I want to move it back, John. Hey, just yeah,
is the absolutely pressing question. So Trump represents something very dangerous within the development of the United States and internationally. And I think we're in for a period that is going to be one of enormous dangers, but that raises incredible possibilities for working class struggle and for working class mobilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for a very interesting opening contribution and for keeping well within the time limits that we had set. Now we're opening the discussion to everybody, so anybody can ask any question they wish, develop any points they wish to make, or given the time, we can come back in and out to develop and argue points to further conclusions. So the first speaker who's indicated he wants to speak is Ian. So if anybody else wishes to come in after Ian, can they put the electronic indicator on their screen, and I'll call people in the order that they indicate. So Ian, where you go.
Thanks, comrade. As you said, the speaker kept well within time, so I'll try and make a short first question too. More stuff might come to me, and if there's a second round, but I think what really struck me was when you said about Biden being a disaster and that opening the door to Trump, which I totally agree about. But kind of riffing from that, also the left falling in behind Biden. The fact that Bernie Sanders said that he wouldn't primary Biden, though he didn't rule himself out standing if it was an open primary. The fact that him and AOC and people like that were the last people standing, saying that Biden should still be the candidate when even the establishment had to abandon them over his debate performance, kind of was the ridiculous outworking of it, though there was some logic to it from a reformist perspective because they had got something out of him in the 2020 election, whereas with Harris, she was clearly a palace coup. The left weren't even at the table. And yeah, keeping Biden as the candidate when he was clearly not up to it physically with his age and his health did prevent an open primary, which even though he didn't end up as the candidate, did hand over to a disastrous other candidate. And I think the absence of the left from all of that, because they didn't challenge him, didn't stand up, at least on the Ukraine war, as much as they should have for peace. They were better on Palestine, perhaps. That left open a huge hole for Trump to fill. So I just wonder what you think about that. And what next? Is the Democrats still a site of struggle? Is Jill Stein something to build on? But we can't keep having an absence of the left and only have the establishment versus the populists.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. The next speaker is John or Dominic Byrne.
John Byrne.
John.
I think myself that the whole election campaign in America and the reporting that it received in Europe and particularly in Britain was an absolute farce. It was reported basically that Harris and Trump were neck and neck. Well, it now turns out that it was absolute rubbish, that Trump was romping home. His base was confident. His base, was almost messianic in its attitude that if Trump did not be re-elected, then it would be an absolute disaster for America. I think what struck me in particular was Harris, that she was in no way independent of Biden, and Biden was in no way independent, quite bluntly, of Netanyahu. the position's one that Kamala Harris boasted about the fact that Taylor Swift had endorsed her. And who's Taylor Swift? She's a pop star that I would say her main area of support as a pop star would come from young teenagers, a group, from what I can gather, in America that is largely, although by no means wholly, apolitical. There are a lot of young Americans that are very political. But the thing is that she boasted of that, and at the same time, faced with the fact that the swing states were seen as key, she totally ignored the one state that had a large Muslim-Arab population in Michigan, that the last days of the election campaign, she refused to even make any overtures to that electorate. And that electorate was moving very strongly in favor of Trump because they saw Biden as a sort of lapdog of Netanyahu. And quite frankly, if you were to draw up a plan of disaster, you couldn't have done a better one than what the Harris camp did. And quite frankly, now, given, if you like, what I see as the anti-working class approach that Trump is taking, although he tries to put it over that he is a friend of the working class, it is a real wake-up call to the left in America, and particularly to the working class and the trade unions as to where they stand. Trump's boasted that he brought about the ceasefire in the Middle East, but today's news indicates Trump in his reality talking of exporting 1.5 million Palestinians to either Jordan or combined Jordan and Egypt, and that he sees Gaza as a heap of rubble that needs cleaning up. And that heap of rubble, I think in a previous statement he said, was real prime real estate, i.e. fit for Jewish settlers.
He also said Israel was too small.
And also, we can see it in southern Lebanon. We can see it in the Golan Heights. That again, I believe Trump said at one time that Israel is too small for its population. And when one looks at, if you like, the attitude of Hitler towards the Jews, the comparisons seem to leap out at you. That we now have a situation in Israel where they're looking for living room and they're prepared to take over, if you like, areas on their borders, and will be given the blessing of the United States, who, quite frankly, will ride roughshod over the United Nations. They've already withdrawn from the World Health Organization. And I think myself that what we see in America now is a real warning to the world, and particularly to the working class, that this man is an absolute nutcase, but he's a nutcase with a huge following. He's a nutcase who has a very clear agenda. It's not as though he's fuddled and doesn't know what he's saying. He knows exactly what he's saying, and particularly the fact that he was elected not only with, I don't think he quite reached the majority of the popular vote, but that meant that he got somewhere like 49% of the popular vote. And given that the Greens did a respectable vote, that meant that he definitely overwhelmed the Democrats. And also, he has in his pocket the House of Representatives, the Senate, which is probably going to be a bit more independent-minded, but also a House, the Supreme Court, that prior to the election, more or less gave him carte blanche, that he could be a Roman emperor, and short of deifying him, has left him, with all the cards that he wants. I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Why short?
Just to finish, I think it now falls very clearly on the, if you like, the working class in America and the trade unions to wake up and see what's going on. I mean, one of his major policies is to rip up a clause in the United States Constitution, and that is to deport millions of legal people in America because they were, if you like, the children of non-registered parents. And the American Constitution says anybody born in the United States is a citizen of the United States. I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Thank you, John. The next comrade who indicated that he wanted to speak is Aman. So, Aman.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I enjoyed the discussion, but a couple of points I'd just like to probably emphasize on. I think one issue is with regard to the election of Trump. To a larger scale, this is portrayed as a victory for Trump. I think you could always call it that, but I'm just more happy to say I'm one of those who agree that it is not the case that Trump did win. It was the other way around. It was the loss of Biden. I think that is a more appropriate way of looking at it. The policies of Biden, whether within the US, whether with regard to Israel, which I think the issue of Palestine had a big impact on the social formations. Two, the number of people who took part in the elections of the US this time was lower. We're talking about 46%. That's one thing. The actual vote numbers that Trump had was lower than the last time. The issue is not the winning of the Trump again. I'm trying to say what is the problem with the general mass who actually were against Biden's administration. I think that is the more of an issue. Second point was that Trump worked on the basis of anti-establishment, as it was called. And I think that era has passed. The anti-establishment, whether in US or in Europe, was taken over by the right wing in the absence of the left, in the absence of the working class present, effectively, or its socialists. The right wing actually took over the anti-establishment. The question is, does that still work? Does that work a second time? I'm just saying that the scenario has changed. Not only the world has changed, the trust, or if you like, even the reliance on what was called the states, international bodies, etc., has plummeted in many parts of the world. So that would have an impact. So that's one thing. Second thing, that the issue that Trump is actually said to have done so far is that the economy of US is going to move up and be in an advantage position with regard to anybody who works there. That there are serious doubts if that is going to be possible with even the protectionism that he's going through with the tariffs, etc. Higher inflation and many other issues are in the pipeline. Last but not least, I think the notion seems to be that whatever Trump says is whatever the world will do. That is, I don't think, true. Trump wants this, Trump wants that, and it's as if that is going to happen. For the sake of argument, let's just pick up one point. The idea that everybody in NATO is going to raise its membership fee up to 5%. The US does 3%. Even catching up with the 2% is going to put a lot of those newly joined Eastern Bloc countries to EU in huge problem, never mind UK and France, etc. So there are a lot of issues which is intentions of what Trump wants to put, but that becoming a reality and that taking place is another thing. Just to give you an example, if you assume that the world remains the same as it is, Israel wanted to do hundreds of thousands of different things, but we saw that was not possible, even though it had the means, it had the army, etc. I think the idea is, to a large extent, to say something about the notion that Trump has said, Trump has done. So therefore, we are in a worse scenario. I think the other part of the society is not in the same position that it was 4 or 5 years ago. That has changed as well. So it needs a little bit of a balance. Just remember the auto workers strike and the response of Biden, similarly the response of Trump. Insofar as they're concerned, there was no difference between the two. Even Trump was a little bit more heavy-handed than Biden was. So there are issues which I think are coming up, and I think it's still an open place with regard to definitely deciding if Trump can do what it says he do, and whether even in his competition, if you like, with China, or drawing a wedge between China and Russia, and all of these are just open questions, which I tend to say that there was a case when we had a world of two poles, East and West. The change of that to a pole of US and its new world order had heavy tolls, and wasn't as easy as they made it sound to be. I think changing from a world of that to a world of multipolar still going to have a lot of repercussions and a lot of ripples to go through yet, which would have actions and reactions from all sections of society. So it's a little bit of a nuance if you look at what are the situation in regard to the credibility of the institutions, and to what extent would even the US public go along with what Trump says. Thanks, that's it.
Thank you, Aman. The next speaker to indicate is Charles.
Thank you, and please disregard the strange accent from over here. It's so much of what's been said I'm in agreement with, and it's a good analysis of where we are. Maybe a few things that maybe you see from over there, but I can reiterate over here. Remember the UAW strike, when the president of the UAW said, well, we're not just going to hand out our endorsement to Biden. He's got to earn it. The next week he shows up, waves a little bit around on the picket line, and then they give him the endorsement. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got the possibility of a massive ILA strike, and we were involved in a attempted united front with a number of left organizations to try to reach out to the ILA workers, to blockade military shipments to Gaza. But that strike was shut down very quickly by Daggert. It's a very right-wing leadership, and indeed he embraced Trump and counts on Trump to forestall the power of the automation to put away, lots of jobs. And if you look on the ILA website, he's saying, well, we're the automation isn't going to take away jobs, and celebrating 63% gain over a 6-year period, which seems like a lot to people, but it's a makeup gain, and it doesn't really account for the possibilities of what's happening with inflation. The so-called left in America has been broken for years and years. The apt quote of a crisis of leadership of the working class is not new. We've been struggling with this for decades. My entire political existence in life, I've understood the crisis of leadership of the working class, and the role of the Stalinists in driving the working class and the leadership of the trade unions into the arms of the Democrats, where they've been since before I was born and have not broken. And then you've got these false flags of independence coming up with Bernie Sanders and AOC, but then they turn coat on us every time, as we saw with the railroad workers when AOC stabbed them in the back, and the DSA had a bit of a shit fit, going, well, how come she's DSA but she's stabbing the railroad workers in the back? Well, you can't expect a capitalist party to allow to be a base for independent working class politics. And in terms of you folks are not here, but there's always been this racist underbelly. I'm sure you've seen it and smelled it from across the pond. It stinks here, and MAGA is not really new. It's just this reemergence of something that I was taught existed right down the block and around the corner with the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan burning crosses. Last one that was burned on Long Island was burned in my hometown. So it's not alien to us what's going on here. The Proud Boys marched in San Francisco just yesterday with the anti-abortionists. Only 1,000 of them. They had to be shipped in. 1,000 of the anti-abortionists, and probably only a handful of the Proud Boys. But the left, one didn't know they were coming, and a few of them tried to block them, who were there to block the anti-abortion squads. So, we're still in the crisis of not having a independent working class movement. Indeed, when I was growing up, we had to argue that the working class even existed at all. You couldn't say working class until the Republicans took over the term. Up until just a few, it feels like days ago, but a few years ago, and now even the trade union leadership refers to itself as building the middle class and runs from the term working class because they're running from Marxism. They're running from the consequences of understanding class relationship in society. So we have to fight for a united front of working class organizations to break from the leadership of our trade unions because they are rotten and statified and tied to the capitalist party, and we have to fight with trade union caucuses. I attended the memorial of Howard Keylor yesterday. All my differences with the SL and the IBT and the IG, if you're familiar with Spartacist League, International Bolshevik Tendency, and International Group aside. And I've written about them in this Communist Workers Group's blog. I still, have known Howard for decades on the front line, and he embodied a big piece of what is missing is trade union militants that have a communist ideology and fight for a transitional program in caucuses to confront the trade union leadership. That is not what's happening on the left in America. And most of the left organizations of any size, ISO, which, because of its rape problem, fell apart, and PSL, because of its Putinite politics and subservience to the Maoists or the neo-Maoist capitalist regime in China, really have no real support in the working class. They don't fight in the trade unions for working class independence. And the Greens, Ian brought up, they're not an option either. If you really read their program, it's not a socialist program. They're a petty bourgeois capitalist party, and they've long been, for the last few years, they supported Assad, they supported Putin. To say they're outright Putinists and Assadists and murderers of the working class would be maybe an overstatement, but they sure as hell didn't fight for working class independence or a working class united front against imperialism. So just to close up, we do feel isolated out here fighting for a new Zimmerwald and a united front against inter-imperialist war. We do feel isolated fighting in the working class for united fronts to build a labor party, something that is massively necessary. And we do feel isolated fighting for working class defense of immigrants and oppressed communities in terms of self-defense guards. But that's the task that we're taking up, and that's the propaganda we're putting out and pushing into the left, and we'll unite with any of the groups. And there are many of the left groups that are now mentioning, at least in their propaganda, in small forums like Freedom Socialist Party, Left Voice, Workers' Party of Virginia, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, all calling for labor parties. But this has not come together into any kind of united front for a labor party. So I'll leave it at that. say we need a revolutionary party to fight for a mass workers' party and for class struggle against the trade union bureaucracy that holds this back from class struggle methods, back from the working class, because it will be in the class struggle that the new party has to be built out of.
Thank you, Charles. In the absence of other hands, I'll just make one or two comments myself to stimulate some of the discussion. I think we need to examine why it is that the trade union leadership are so embedded with the Democratic Party and the working class in America are so alienated from the Democratic Party. I read some research recently about Michigan and the collapse of the steel industry. And apparently the Democrats were deeply embedded in the working class around Michigan and where the steel industry was. But with the collapse of the steel industry, there was the collapse of the trade union structures because obviously with the industry going, the unions went. Now the Democrats used to have halls in the cities and towns of Michigan, and these halls were used as social gatherings, places of social gatherings, union meetings, family events, social occasions. But when the industry went and steel industry collapsed, then the union halls, where the Democrats would hold occasional meetings, the union halls which the union had supported closed down, and the link between the Democrats and the unions began to break down. And then what was left as a gap in the community and was filled by right-wing organizations, such as the National Rifle Association and others. So they used to hold events and people held family occasions, social occasions in NFA environments and obviously Christian environments. The result being that the right wing got a foothold in an area where previously the unions used to own buildings and halls and had a link with the Democrats. The Democratic vote then collapsed along with the union vote and union membership. So I'd like to get some examination of how do you replace that? What concrete steps might happen or should we seek to see happen to replace the disastrous hold the Democrats used to have on the official union bureaucracy in the States? How do we build? I know Charles is right. We need to have a left-wing party in America. There have been many attempts, going back as far as Eugene Debs. Socialist Party picked up 1 million votes, but in recent times there have been efforts and endeavors for some of the unions, the auto workers, for example, and some others, to try and establish some kind of left party, but they've all failed to date. So perhaps we might examine how would that come about? How would a new party emerge? What concrete steps might we take initially to kick that process to start? So maybe examine that somewhat. Now I see Roger has indicated and Ian wants to speak, so we'll have Roger first, then followed by Ian. If anyone else wishes to speak, just indicate with the electronic hand. Roger.
Right. Really, I haven't got very much to say because the events speak for themselves. It's such an absolutely dramatic turn in the whole of history. What has happened now? We're really to say that we're entering a new era is an understatement. It's as big a change as any since, well, since the end of the Second World War, I would say, in terms of the relationship between the ruling class and the working class, not just in the USA, but by extension worldwide. You could say that it's the last shreds, the last tissue of the mask of democracy and liberalism has been just openly and blatantly thrown away now by the victory of Trump. It's a most it's by no means just a sort of swing of the pendulum or anything of that kind. It really means a change in the attitude of the ruling class because the ruling class in a previous in the era that has long gone now, but they would have treated Trump as a buffoon because personally he's got very little personal qualities to actually entitle him to leadership of the most dominant power in the world. He doesn't have the talent to anything. What he has is bluster, bullying, and intimidation. Those are his tools. He has nothing. He has nothing else. But that now is now the resort, not just of Trump. It's not just an accident that he's come to power, but we've seen very, very blatantly in front of our eyes that the world's top billionaires have openly allied with him and supported him and adopted him and promoted him as their face and as their political representatives. In other words, the whole mask of liberalism has been just thrown away, and I don't think there's going to be any return to the era of the sort of democracy and liberalism and the welfare state and so on, which was the face that the bourgeoisie presented to society up until now. It's the frenzy of a class in complete desperation, and we saw that. We saw not only Musk, but Bezos and what's the other one?
Zuckerberg.
Pardon?
Zuckerberg.
I didn't hear you.
Zuckerberg.
Oh yeah, Zuckerberg. That's right. Those three, the top billionaires. I mean, Musk is actually scheduled, according to projections, within 2 or 3 years to be the world's first trillionaire, million dollars. And his fascist salute, and it was a fascist salute. You don't accidentally just just to make sure of it, he did it twice. Perform a Nazi salute. It was there as a absolute statement of the new policy and the new strategy of the ruling class. And what we see now, it's not just a question of, I mean, there's so many things that have been mentioned already about that, just absolutely graphic, monstrous demonstrations by Trump of what he has in mind. We're talking about the deportation of millions of people from America, the amnesty given to open insurrectionary fascists from 4 years ago, all the rest of it, which are symbolic of something even more horrific. And what we see just in terms of policy, of economic policy and so on, the imposition of tariffs, the declaration of trade war, and particularly interesting in terms of what it could mean is when he's now threatening to impose tariffs even on US companies that produce abroad, in other words, in search of in the exploitation of cheap labor in the third world. And what would that mean? It would mean if it works and if they return production back to the home in the USA, then what that will mean is imposing third world conditions and third world wages also on the workers of the USA. And as we've said before, it's not just the USA we're talking about, because we've seen exactly the same tendency and the same process throughout the world, throughout Europe for a start, where most of the countries of Europe now have far right governments or governments in which the far right are represented, and and that includes, as I keep saying, it includes what used to be the country with the biggest communist party in the capitalist world, includes Italy, where you have a fascist or what we call, if you like, neo-fascist. Let's not quibble about the words, but I would say, for the sake of simplicity, a fascist prime minister in Italy. We have fascists supporting the coalition in social democratic Sweden. And in Finland and in Austria, and I mean, we can give the whole Hungary and all the rest of it. And soon, very probably, in France, in Spain, and at least as part of a coalition in Germany, and in Britain too, unless 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 the working class wake up in time, which is a very, very big if, that we will see probably a Farage government, and resting also on the hidden threat or the reserve threat of a Tommy Robinson street gangs as well. It's got to be. We are in that era now. It's a completely new thing. It's an era of open genocide, of open annexations, of open ethnic cleansing, like Trump announced today. Somebody referred to it already, of just cleansing Gaza and the West Bank of their indigenous populations, and uh, just sweeping them somewhere else. The ones that still survive the genocide. So I mean, this is the thing, and in other words, they've completely thrown away the mask of the past, and that's something we've got to get used to. We've got to stop having any illusions that the ruling class is going to behave in any way subtly or strategically or anything. It's all out class war, and that's what this means. So the new era began last Monday, and that was the decisive turning point, if you like. And the one last thing, though, I'd say, though, is that also means that all the delusions of the that have held sway for long after any justification for it, of in the leadership of the working class and the leadership of the ex-workers' parties, because none of them anymore could be characterized as real parties of the working class anymore, of the trade union bureaucrats and the rest of them, that there's no possibility now of accommodation, of deals, of anything like that. And the working class, and particularly the youth in the working class, and the youth absolutely, who have absolutely nothing to hope for in terms of jobs, in terms of education, in terms of housing, in terms of the climate, and in terms of war and peace. I mean, the horrors that they're facing. We can see there has to be a complete change in the whole character of politics in the working class, and I think that's why what we're doing in WIN is, of course, we're not going to exaggerate. All we're doing is we're just part of a process. But in discussing all this, this is the beginning of some kind of preparation of some of us. And of course, this is happening not only here, but in discussions that have been raging throughout the world. The discussions, think of the discussions there must have been in all the occupations of the public squares that we've seen in the last few years, in the shanty towns, in the workplaces, and so on. That those discussions are going to be more and more, particularly from the youth, that there has to be all-out war against the ruling class. That, in other words, we have to meet like with like. So that's a few comments anyway.
Thank you, Roger. When you mentioned Elon Musk's Nazi salute, it reminded me of that film Dr. Strangelove. I don't know if Connor's have seen that film.
Like that, yeah.
Where Peter Sellers plays 2 or 3 roles. One of them is a mad scientist who has a prosthetic arm, and he has to hold the arm down because every time he gets angry, his arm shoots out in a Nazi salute. So I think Elon Musk's salute was no accident.
Yeah.
And it'll be interpreted in exactly how he wishes it to be interpreted across the globe. Right-wingers will be encouraged with the fact that on the stage of the United States presidency, an openly fascist symbolic act takes place. So we shouldn't underestimate, as Roger's explained, the dangers that we face in this coming period. Ian, you wanted to speak again?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, just a quick response to Charles about the Greens. I agree about them being a bourgeois party, petty bourgeois, not the answer. I do think they're better in America than in Europe, ironically, for reasons you might not agree with. What you call Jill Stein's Assadist Putinist position. I actually think she's a very strong anti-imperialist, and the attacks on her from the Green parties of Europe, including the foreign minister of Germany, who's come out in favor of bombing schools in Gaza, but said that that's what Germany stands for, bombing schools to get rid of terrorists. Quite chilling. And she thinks this is some kind of atonement because of the nationality that's doing it now. Yeah, they all denounced Stein, called on her to support Harris. But within the Green Party in America, there's different tendencies. So as Howie Hawkins took a different position on international issues, you might prefer it. I prefer Stein's. But at least it's much more independent as a party than the European versions have become. But it's obviously not the answer when it comes to socialism. In that way, Bernie Sanders, although he was within the Democrats, was more advanced than the Greens as an alternative. And if he'd broken, things could be very different. Even if he'd stayed in but primaried Biden, things could be very different. But I guess my question, or extension of my previous question, comes out of, on the one hand, I agree with the epochal nature of things that Roger was discussing. But on the other hand, I'm with Aman and John on this being probably more a defeat for the Democrats than a victory for Trump. That this isn't the same as the 30s with the working class so on the march that the ruling class turned to fascism to put it back in its box, hired Hitler, and then turned out that Hitler wasn't going to take his P-45 once the job was done because of the autonomous and terrible nature of fascism, but initially was brought in quite consciously because the balance of forces in some ways was so favorable to us as a kind of last throw of the dice. Whereas now, nobody seriously saying they've hired Trump to smash a left that would otherwise be immediately coming to power. Like Harris, the sheer fecklessness of that campaign, that was 100 days or so. It raised record amounts of money. It still managed to go millions and millions into debt, including paying celebrities for endorsements. What was Oprah going to do if Harris paid less or nothing than she wanted? Endorsed Donald Trump, making the one actual line of differentiation on policy around abortion when it was on the ballot separately in multiple states and polled in double figures ahead of Harris, and of course couldn't be affected nationally in a way other than her getting in for several terms and waiting for lots of vacancies on the Supreme Court that Trump had just filled. And obviously shouldn't be the only difference between someone you're calling an out-and-out fascist dictator and a democratic, let alone progressive candidate anyway. So she was on the one hand telling Americans this is your last chance to fight dictatorship, and on the other hand just pocketing the money and giving it to our friends and to our campaign staffers. It's pretty atrocious stuff from the establishment Democrats. And yet I see that Kamala Harris is leading in polls to be the 2028 candidate in the Democratic Party. I don't know if that will actually happen. I don't know if they'll in any way start to go back to having skepticism around wars. One of the real problems has been the Democrats have become the party default of pro-war, and the right out of power, it'll be interesting now that they're in power, have been able to pose as the anti-war side. And we even see divisions on the right. They're pretty united on not approving of Biden's proxy war in Ukraine. But when it comes to Gaza, there's obviously a lot more division. Some people like Tucker Carlson have actually not been too bad on Gaza. He platformed the vicar of Bethlehem, who Justin Welby refused to meet. That's our former archbishop, because he shared a platform with Jeremy Corbyn. But he got platformed by Tucker Carlson to talk about Palestine. And so, meanwhile, Harris campaigning with Dick Cheney thought that would be a vote winner to win over swing Republicans. Dick Cheney was not a moderate Republican in my memory of campaigning against the Iraq War. Meanwhile, as other comrades have already said, trying to triangulate around, ironically, in much the same area of the Great Lakes in Michigan, having once triangulated around throwing people out of work in the factories, and now triangulating around actually killing the families of people in very similar areas in Michigan with the Arab American communities, sending Bill Clinton in the last days to rehash the nonsense about the generous offer in 2000 and even more obscene Zionist talking points, while Trump was cunning enough to say out of one side of his mouth very pro-Israel stuff, but also that he'd bring peace and sharing the platform with imams and Muslims. So yeah, this utter fecklessness from the Democrats has to be factored in. It's not just conspiracy, but also cock-up. And also, what next? Will they go with Harris or someone like Harris again? Will they now finally see that appealing to the neocon wing of the Republican Party is not a good substitute for working class and anti-war elements of their own historic coalition? And what about the outside left? Will this pose further challenges for it with more of a Democrat squeeze, or if the establishment Dems go down this road of fecklessness, will it provide more of an opening outside the Democratic Party for a significant challenge, or indeed a primary challenge that's a little more combative and willing to go independent if it again gets cheated?
Thank you, John. John Clark this time. I was wondering, do you want to make some comments on the points made to date? You'll have an opportunity to summarize the entire discussion and close down the discussion at the end. But as of now, if you want to make some comments on the points that have come up, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make a couple of comments. I noticed that Elon Musk's name came up, and the point was made that, like Dr. Strangelove, he couldn't control his arm, but he controls his mouth even less well. And I think that he speaks the way he speaks, the language he's talking, the organizations he's funding, and the fact that he's so central to the Trump administration is actually enormously telling. I think it does give a sense of just how reactionary the initiative that's emerging is. I would just like to say that I think that this is, it's correct to say that this is a changed era. And it's correct to say that there are going to be incredibly dangerous moves that are being made. Trump is going to engage in class war at home. And it's going to be entirely brutal. He's going to confront workers and unions, but he's going to confront the social infrastructure, and he's going to engage in a relentless drive against immigrants, migrants. It's going to be entirely brutal. Internationally, he thinks that he's going to make a lot of money from tariffs. He thinks that he's going to successfully limit China, curtail it. He thinks he's going to force his rivals and his competitors and his erstwhile friends to all accept entirely subordinate positions and a greatly reduced piece of the pie. And he's ready to engage in gunboat diplomacy. But this strategy, as the US is beset by global rivals and as its position totters, I don't think is a winning proposition. I think he's going to massively destabilize the international situation and weaken the US position even further with this approach. And I also think it's important to say that the points that have been made about the role of the Democratic Party are largely true, but something needs to be drawn from that. The failure of the Democratic Party, and it's true of the failure of the political center parties, whether they're social democratic or liberal throughout the world, they have failed, but their failure isn't some mistaken electoral strategy. You know, just as the Labour Party apparatus wanted to see the Tories win rather than Corbyn, I think it's absolutely true that the Democrats would not have relinquished support for Israel in order to win an election. Genocide Joe was going to continue, and Harris continued in his place. They would rather see Trump in the White House than be party to an agenda that actually represented the interests of working class people. And I think that's really, really fundamental in our appraisal of the political center, which is part of the crisis that's happening at the moment. Finally, I think it's absolutely correct that what is required is an independent political party, a working class party in the United States. And it's true that there's been a long history of trying and a long history of failing. But I think the present situation is one in which, if that's going to happen, it's going to come out of the actual class struggle to an incredible degree. We're going to see people resisting. We're going to see trade union leaders, and we're going to see the Democratic Party doing everything it can to play the role of firefighter. That's not a situation that's unique to the United States. There's going to be an attempt to contain the class struggle, and in that situation, taking forward the struggle, actually ensuring that fights are taken up that are fights to win, is going to be so fundamental to actually creating the political space for a viable working class political alternative.
Yeah, thank you, John. John and Dominic Byrne, the hand is up again there.
Yes, it's Dominic.
Dominic, yeah.
I think a lot of what I was going to say has just been said by the speaker. I think the thing is, it is going to be a grassroots struggle. I mean, Ian was discussing things internal to the Democratic Party and all the rest of it. If the working class are to get anywhere, that party is going to be a thing of the past. The leaders that emerge in the future are not the present leaders of sects or parties that proclaim themselves half in the interests of the working class. The struggles that are going to start are going to be from the grassroots, because what you're going to find, your health service has been attacked, is going to be privatized. All your other services are going to be privatized, and it's going to be a question of making money, not making, as Ford said, we're here to make money, not to make cars. So it's going to be the same with health and all the other services. And the workers are going to say, this standard of living is falling. We're going to food banks. Skilled workers are going to be facing these situations and so on. And they're going to look for solidarity. Because where you've got a workplace, you've got workers working together, and they'll be discussing how they can cope with all this and what the present leaderships of these trade unions are doing. And you'll get something like a shop stewards movement starting up, where workers in the factories will start saying, we need to do this and need to do that. Then they'll realise they need to link up with other workers. It's almost you're going back to the lessons of the past. So that's a situation. And who the hell's going to have any support for full-time officials and all the rest of it, who just say, well, look, life's difficult and we can't do very much. We've had a word and they say no. So you're just going to have to put up with it. What's the point in being an organisation like that that's supposed to defend your rights? I mean, it's going back to Elon Musk as a separate thing. I mean, he was telling Reform that they should get rid of Farage as the leader and put somebody in, presumably a more fascist version. And they should have links with Tommy Robinson. You know, it should be disastrous at this stage as far as they're concerned. But this is sort of quite blatant on the part of Elon Musk. He wants a fascist organisation, not just in America, but on a worldwide basis. And it's not just a danger. The Trump organisation is not just a danger to the working class in America. They're a danger to the working class internationally. And I think that's what we've got to take on board. It's a bit muddled now because most of what I was going to say has been said far better by the previous speaker.
Thank you, Dominic. No. Any other comrade wish to speak? Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, I'll try to slow my energy down just a little bit from last time. Just a few things in the Bay Area where I live. We knew who Kamala Harris was. She was the district attorney in San Francisco in the AG for California. And at that time, we were fighting against police brutality. I was working directly with the family of child Kenneth Harding Jr., who was shot in the back by the San Francisco police for jumping the turnstile and left there in the heat to die on the street. And when the family and this is a black family, tried to approach Kamala Harris, who was the AG at the time, to get some kind of justice. She wouldn't even hear them. And then, so the whole, that's of course ignored by the movements of the oppressed in the United States, which have basically been taken over or replaced by, well, a Democratic Party leadership and this politics of postmodernism they accuse people like us of class reductionism, and they raise up every specially oppressed sector as independent. So anyone who is not of the so-called specially oppressed should shut up and take a back seat. And so someone like Harris has more of a right to speak than a working class person speaking as a working class person. That aside, I agree that there's a change of era. I don't agree that we're in an age of multipolarism. I think we're in an age of bipolarism, of an inter-imperialist struggle. It's the terminal crisis of capitalism combined with the environmental crisis. I think it's extremely urgent. I agree that the new party will come out of the class struggle and only out of the class struggle. At the same time, there's a role for cadre building and cadre organizations, because I don't agree with any of the anarchist or Luxemburgist spontaneity that out of the class struggle, the masses will emerge with red flags and call for the Soviets and for the formation of the workers' councils. They might be driven to it, but they won't necessarily come to those conclusions in a rapid enough progression to make it happen. That's the lesson of Bolshevism. That's the lesson of what is to be done. That's the lesson of 1917, and that's the task that that has to be fought. And unfortunately, most of the left that you run into bends to the spontaneism of Occupy, bends to the spontaneism of I call it fake Luxemburgism, because I don't think she was as bad as the Luxemburgists today, and denounce anyone that says you have to build a working class party that takes the fight into the unions to challenge the Democratic Party leadership. I tried to do that in the union I was in. I was expelled twice, and it was a battle and isolated, and that's what happens. It's a giant funnel. Thousands enter, few make it through. And many get kicked to the wayside. But 7 years after the fight that I was in, where we said we had the right to strike, and the bureaucrats said, no, you have no right to strike, the union finally was able to pull off a strike. Doesn't mean they broke from the Democrats. The radicals had been driven out, but in there, there's a trickle of a history, even before myself, people fighting for 30 for 40 and class independence. And then I was in there fighting for 30 for 40 and class independence, and the building of interunion committees and class struggle caucuses and the right to strike. And then eventually they go on strike. That means that there's cracks happening. But they can only happen when we drive the wedge and we slam on the goddamn wedge with the sledgehammer of the program. So I'm still advocating for the Leninist methodology of building the cadre organizations. Do I think, a bunch of cadre organizations are going to go into a back room somewhere and initiate the mass workers' party? No, obviously I agree with Dominic. It'll come out of the class struggle, has to come out of the class struggle, but we can't just hope that it's going to emerge like Occupy. We had 40,000 people jump out when they shot that vet down in Oakland, and jump out of nowhere. They hadn't been attending the Occupy meetings and shut down the ports with 40,000 people and then did it again with 5,000 people. Did that turn into a mass workers' party? No, there were only a handful of people fighting for a workers' party at the time, but there were a whole lot more Democrats, including big time celebrities, that showed up and said, oh, we have to all, we have to get on the, it wasn't the Bernie wagon at the time. It was the second round of, no, it was the Clinton wagon. And so that's that's all I have to say here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. It looks like the discussion is coming towards a conclusion here, comrades. So if so, we'll ask John to make some summary points to draw the general issues that have been raised to some kind of a focus in his summing up. So in the absence of anybody else, okay, John, if you could summarize the discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting discussion. Thank you very much indeed for everyone. So I think that we're in a situation where capitalism has functioned with the dominant power, the hegemonic power, and there were different periods, the colonial period and such like, but a general crisis that is now besetting us is very much focused on the situation of the United States itself as the dominant power. And I do want to emphasize that I think Trump is a symptom of the malaise that is facing that period of US domination. That can't be underestimated. It's a very ugly response, but in some ways it's a desperate response. When I watch Biden taking the incoming president in for tea, and when I watch Zuckerberg, for the relatively liberal face of the tech billionaires, sitting there having paid $1 million to participate in the inauguration, the collapse of an establishment alternative to the America First approach that is being put forward is something that is absolutely decisive. And I think what emerged in the discussion, and several people raised it very forcefully and very importantly, is that this does represent the end of an era. An end of an era. Class compromise has gone out of fashion to an increasing degree over a very long period, but it's been a relatively incremental process. What we're now seeing is a break with that. I think the comments that Roger made were quite decisive in that regard. There is now a period of intensified ruling class offensive. By no means is it confined to the United States, but it's happening very spectacularly in the epicenter of the system, to a degree that's quite remarkable and quite amazing. And that means that the nature of the class struggle is not going to fundamentally change, but there's going to be a very, very important intensification. There are going to be dramatic attacks, and all of the mechanisms that have played for a compromise, whether that's brokering things through the Democratic Party in the case of the United States, whether it's trade union activity that is compartmentalized and limited and such like, is now going to be ineffective in the face of that. That we're going to see, in some ways, from a position of weakness, and in some ways desperately, but we're going to see the US on the offensive in terms of the domestic situation, to impose resounding defeats, to ensure that an agenda of racism and social backwardness is triumphant. And internationally, the United States is going to make a play to reassert its domination, not by working through the systems of compromise and multilateralism that used to exist, but by disregarding those, by seeking to impose new terms on its rivals, on its junior partners. And this is going to be quite dramatic. I think it's going to affect everything. And I think that advancing a socialist alternative to this is absolutely decisive. The liberal forces, the social democratic forces of the political center really have nothing to say in this situation. It's a changed situation of intensified class struggle. Trump is an ugly symptom of that, and he's going to really push things over the edge. He's going to do that within the United States. He's going to do it internationally. So this is an important discussion. These are incredibly exciting times. They are full of enormous dangers, and there are no guarantees, and resounding defeats are possible. But a transformed, rejuvenated movement in terms of its ability to mobilize, to strike, to disrupt the agenda of capital, and to learn the political lessons that can build real, effective working class political leadership. These are all posed before us at the present time. So a time of great dangers, a time of great possibilities, a time that's enormously exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade. I want to thank John for a very stimulating, very interesting opening contribution, and also the subsequent contributions he's made in raising questions in a very specific and challenging manner, which we all have to go away and think about and try to find concrete ways forward from the general points that have been raised. Also, other comrades who have spoken in the discussion, I want to thank them for well thought out contributions, very cogent and very interesting issues being raised, which again we have to consider and find ways to act upon. So thank you all for the taking part in the discussion, and thanks again to John. Now, Roger's going to say maybe something about next week's meeting, hopefully.
Well, I'm afraid as sometimes happens, we have to say watch this space. There will be you'll be getting your emails in good time. We're looking at a number of different possibilities, but we I very much welcome everybody to come next week and regularly, because I think these discussions are absolutely enlightening, and everybody's contribution has enriched us all. So that's all I have to say for now. But do come next week, and you'll get notices in good time.
Thank you, Roger. So if everybody following Roger's advice looks at their emails, they'll see the notice for next week's meeting and the topic or topics that will be discussed. So in the meantime, good night, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll meet up again next Sunday. Slán a go there.